It's not often that I see such a big change in total assets decreasing, yet the company is still defensive. I mean, this seems like a turtling up sort of scenario. A change in this line, programming and other inventory, this is clearly the biggest change in the whole balance sheet, and it's been swinging around by just under $2.5 billion, which again is not it's something, but it's not that much for a company of this size. Statement of cash flows. Amortization of content costs, and then in the working capital, it seems to be related to increase in inventory. This is a media company, so content is likely what they mean by inventory, although I'll double check that before we go too far. Both of these rows are gargantuan compared to everything else. You can kind of see tiny numbers and then these two behemoths of these rows. Combined with what we saw in the balance sheet, their inventory for content is actually decreasing substantially in the latest year. So they're investing in content, not selling it right away, but when they do sell that content, the mix there's a slowdown happening. Another big number here that almost doesn't look that big relative to these other rows, but is still sizable, and had to catch myself, I almost ignored it, is this programming charges number. Did not exist any other year except the latest year. And like I said, it's sizable, representing almost 10 times more than any other number on here. What are these programming charges, and why are they roughly 10 times bigger than most other numbers on here? In conclusion of the opening move, programming, whether it be one-off charges or amortization or just inventory, is so huge. It's clearly the main thing this business does. Let's look into it. Hopefully either the CFO or the CEO department can explain what's going on there, because those numbers are swinging wildly within a balance sheet that really isn't changing. Like I said, this is a defensive company when you look at just the balance sheet, yet it's swinging billions of dollars of investment around. It's a weird combo. Now in the notes prepared by the CFO department, the notes to the numbers, scrolled until I found a section for programming inventory, and it's a hefty section. I'm going to do my best to summarize, because while it's hefty, it's actually not super complicated. It's actually kind of simple. Some of their content is made in-house, some of it isn't. Most of it is made in-house. For the in-house content, they're describing here a process of what they're calling matching up to a monetization strategy, a predominant monetization strategy, and then periodically testing for impairment. Now, the periodically testing for impairment is where it gets quite interesting. After reading it over and over again for the last couple of minutes, I think I'm actually recognizing this, and the reason is because I am aware of what venture capital firms do. Now, why is he bringing up a completely different industry? Fair enough. But what happens in venture capital firms is that they invest in many startups. Quantity is preferred. These venture capitalists spend a lot of energy making sure that when they lose on a startup, they actually don't have to pay as much as when they win. What do I mean? If a startup does well, the venture capitalist firm actually has to put more money into the business, but it's productively used money. It's a productively used expense at that point. If a startup doesn't do well, not only does the venture capitalist on purpose set it up at the beginning so that they don't have any additional expenses after they can tell that it's a bust, but they also have set it up so that that can be categorically expensed as an opportunity cost. I put in $100 into this startup. I don't lose $100 because I actually get to tell my tax authority that the opportunity cost of that $100 I spent was actually $150. How can I prove that? Well, because if I hadn't put $100 there, I could have put into my other startup. All of these startups are yearning for money, and so you can actually justify pretty reasonably that every time you invest in another startup or make another show, in the case of Paramount Global, you're actually taking away from the productive use that could have been used. And if you weren't willing to take on that risk, well, then there would be no startups at all. There would be no new television series at all, or movies. I think mainly television series is what I'm reading here. And so backing up again, I put in $100, but if the TV series doesn't work well, I actually lose $150 on my income statement. I didn't spend 150 though, and so there's a $50 gap, and these are just round numbers for the sake of argument. There's a gap in between what actually leaves my bank account and what the tax authority allows me to take off of profit. Now, if I were only investing in failed startups, there would be absolutely no, this would just be dumb, to be fair. But if I even have one profitable startup or profitable TV series in this case, then the profit I generate off of that successful TV show is actually offset by these incentives that tax authorities allow me to take advantage of. That will actually allow me to pay less taxes on the successful TV shows. The way Paramount Global seems to be thinking about this, or at least the CFO office is thinking about this, is that this is a asset in and of itself. These are tax advantage, or this tax advantage is an asset that, if properly managed, can generate value. Therefore, they're spending a lot of time managing this, and that is called impairment tests. Something that's not always available in many industries. In fact, we did a Netflix video a couple months ago. Netflix had a very, very different approach to this. They actually almost do the opposite. Is they aggressively amortize right up front, essentially drawing attention to their most profitable shows on the income statement. Paramount Global purposely making their income statement as pessimistic as possible, because it seems like they just care about the cash flow statement. Hey, if you're getting more comfortable uncovering the stories behind the numbers, please like and subscribe. What I'm describing visually is back here at the income statement. This row, programming charges, is entirely optional. It's entirely the effort of a CFO department reorganizing itself to run like a venture fund. I'd be curious if they just had 2 years where this didn't happen at all, but it kind of maybe is a brand new thing. The way they talk about it, it seems like this is all brand new strategy for them. More importantly, let's look how this same programming charge affects the cash flow statement. Without this programming charge, the company would actually have negative cash flow for the year, but thanks to it, it's actually positive on the cash flow. Now, the difference actually seems to mostly be made up of a growth in selling, general, and administrative. That usually is the most discretionary expense of a business, meaning that this programming charge is roughly aligned with how much more marketing they're spending on in the latest year. An example of that, going back to the income statement, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth. It's just these two things aren't obvious unless you have both statements right next to each other. Neither statement really does a good job of painting this sort of accounting decision. But what I'm saying is that here you got 7.2 over 29.6. A year ago, it was 7 over 30. SG&A as a percentage of revenue has increased, but at the same time, SG&A as a percentage of their total expenses has actually decreased. Now, this is the last switch, I promise. You can see their amortization of content costs is roughly the same, but a little bit decreased. More importantly, in their working capital management, they're actually putting less cash into increasing their inventory. So they're actually spending less on content, spending more on marketing, yet the percentage of their income statement expense related to content is higher than it was last year. Very convoluted, but again, the only reason I can sort of notice it is because I have seen venture capital firms do a similar thing. I'm also pretty sure John Malone popularized this back in the day, back like in the 1900s, late 1900s. I forget exactly which business this was, but this was something that has been done by media companies before. The tax laws of places like New York, California, Florida, don't quote me on it necessarily, but these places where a lot of Hollywood type activity goes on allow this to happen. Overall, what we have here is a media company that is still investing billions and billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in content, but is essentially just turtled up, has had a couple of years where it's not trying to change, just trying to stay the same, basically. This business just Paramount, as well as other companies like Disney, Warner Brothers, Comcast, these are broadcasting companies. At the same time, what is their competition? I mean, Netflix, obviously, but like what, Amazon Prime? That's That's not a media company. That's, I know they're spending money and stuff, but they have no real infrastructure. Even Netflix, as we saw in that video again, is largely just winging it, treating media more like app releases than what has been kind of the norm in the industry. And it's fascinating to see which one of these is going to increasingly maintain. Now, as value investors, when we talk about profitability, we do not mean necessarily the income statement. We mean the actual cash received by the owners of the business. With that being said, I'm now going to guess if the Sage CDI thinks this is high value or very low value. I'm a bit tucked in the middle. Like, obviously, the company is making less money. But that's just on the income statement. The company is still generating cash. As you saw, the almost everything was in two rows. The company just has to manage two rows on its cash flow statement and then it's fine. I'm thinking it's a high value, but I'm not sure how much. I'd say top 30%. What do you think? Tell your friends about the channel. Try to get them to guess as well. Whichever one of you can get closer to the Sage Seeds AI predictions is clearly destined to become a billionaire. Hera is ranked 11 out of 320 in value for the 2023 season, a very good ranking, the 4th percentile, so well within the top 5% of all businesses right now. That's better than I was expecting. And I guess it just goes to show the value of not doing too much. I mean, the business essentially just doing what it's always done and trying to take advantage of some tax, they're not loopholes, but, some tax incentives that only exist for Hollywood companies. Not a bad business.